We ready to go?
You betcha.
Okay, I'm called the meeting, the Government on Operations Committee meeting of Monday, January the 11th to order. Just want to announce that this is being video recorded for future showing. So we'll start off with the agenda, and at this time I'd like to welcome Samantha Murphy to present the 2021 budget on behalf of the Trail and District Public Library. Welcome, Samantha.
Great. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see everyone. I haven't seen everyone in quite a while. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
So thank you for having me here to discuss the 2021 proposed budget. I believe Sandy has sent out my budget report to you. It all look like this. If you need me to resend it, it's no trouble at all. I have also included on Friday a few of my slides, which I'm just going to share with you right now so you don't. So if can everyone see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. So the library is requesting $528,997 from the city. That's pretty much in keeping with the direction that was previously approved by council in January of 2020. In my slides, you will see I have also included my revised budget. That was the budget that I sent out after our COVID closure. So in addition to that money, there is a 4% increase, I understand, in funds from the Village of Warfield. So that's $42,600. We're hoping to see an 8% increase in grants this year. I'm hoping it's going to be higher than that as the year goes on and different grant opportunities do present themselves. I will report back to you in my quarterly reports on hopefully more grant funding opportunities. We have $100 for merchandise, $6,000 for user fees and fines. The majority of this revenue is generated from our copy machine, actually. Non-resident fees is $600. That's our $75 membership fees. Investment income, $1,000. Book replacement costs. So this is cost associated with us lending out books to other libraries that might have got misplaced. And also donations, miscellaneous donations of $1,000. I'm predicting that to be down approximately $500 from last year. Does anyone have any questions about any of the revenue? So for expenditures, our largest expenditure is our salaries and wages. This is down just slightly over last year. The way we've decided, and the year before, we've decided to restructure our summer staffing and our summer reading clubs. So there's a small savings there. For training and development, there is a decrease of 22%. I don't predict myself or any of the board members will be traveling this year. So those savings are associated mostly to do with travel costs. There is also $5,000 in that expenditure. We will be renegotiating our CUPE contract in March this year. So there is $5,000 set aside in there as well, should we need any legal advice. Membership dues has pretty much stayed the same. Insurance, there has been a 19% increase for building insurance that was requested by Reno. For office expenses, that has gone up by 28%, and that's just associated with the cost for masks and gloves and sanitizer, all those things that I predict we're going to be using for the majority of the 2020 year. In terms of financial and legal, there is a small decrease in there from our annual audit expenses, and there is a capital increase of 9%, which is majority of that is due to us upgrading our SICA acquisitions module, as well as our catalog. We are switching to a different platform, which is hopefully going to be much more user-friendly. So in terms of our provincial grants, I just thought I would show you how it was broken down in 2020. I never know ahead of time how much money the provincial government will be giving us for grants. We've been told this year, normally we get that funding in February. It has been postponed to June or July this year. So as soon as I get that, I will be reporting back to you on what it is. So for now, I'm hoping that it's going to remain the same as 2020. There is some projected deferred revenue, things mostly from grant funding, like our book bike, the nonprofit advisors program, things like that. They were, all those projects were delayed due to COVID. So I will be deferring that revenue into 2020. Our restricted revenue accounts have basically remained the same. We have our community technology grant funding, which we are still making our way through. That was delayed as well. There is still approximately $20,000 from the 2017 fundraising donations. And we also have approximately $56,000 in the bank for our technology upgrades that we're expected to do in the future. So that's for things like the computers, copier, big technology purchases like that. So in addition to salary and wages, our largest expenditure is our capital expenses. And I just thought I would show you here how they're broken down. This is my first time presenting the budget for you, and I wasn't sure how far I needed to break it down. So I just gave you an example of how part of our capital expenditure is broken down. So for example, books, we've put aside almost $45,000 for the purchase of books, and then that expenditure will get broken down additionally. So for items in the collection, such as our fiction, nonfiction, large print, and that will be determined by what people are reading and what people request. In addition, we have things like book freight, book processing charges, audiobooks, DVDs, music. Those are all broken down into their separate line items. So I do have the entire budget broken down, and I'm happy to share that with you. If you would like me to, I can email that to any of you, or we can, I'm happy to discuss it.
Okay, thank you. I don't think any, if individual council members want a breakdown, they can email you and you can provide it. I don't think any council members wants to go through line item by line item, do they?
No, not me.
No.
I think that's the consensus. Okay, you can carry on, Samantha, or if that's.
Yeah, that's pretty much wrapped up. We are expecting to conclude our 2020 year in good financial standing. If anyone had any additional questions or anything, I'm happy to answer anything that.
Great, thank you, Samantha. So are there any questions of Samantha from council members?
No.
I just have the one then. Anybody else? Any questions? Carol or?
No, I've lost you. My screen has completely changed. I can hear you, but I can't. Oh, here I am. I'm back. Thank you. No, thanks, Sandy.
Okay. I'm assuming the budget is based on the assumption that COVID is going away very quickly. Or do you see adjustments being made if COVID continues, similar to what we did or what the board, the direction that you received last year from the board in terms of your total expenditures?
So if we do have an additional building closure similar to last year, then I would see us having to revise the budget again, similar to last year. In terms of if everything else stays the same and the building remains open, programming and everything is set up now to continue virtually. The numbers of people coming into the building are much lower, but the same amount of staff are still required when the doors are open. So as long as the building remains open, hopefully I will be able to stick to this budget.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions of Samantha?
No.
If not, then could I have a motion to receive the budget from the library as circulated?
So moved.
Moved by Robert, seconded by,
I'll second.
who was that?
Lisa.
Oh, okay, seconded by Lisa. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The motion is
Sandy.
carried. Thanks
Sandy.
very much, Samantha. Sorry, Robert, go ahead.
Can Samantha send this out separately rather than so I don't have to keep the whole agenda? Can she send out her budget and her information to us separately, please, or to me separately anyways?
Yeah, I can send it to you, Robert, no problem.
Thanks a lot, Samantha.
Okay.
Thank you, Samantha, and you're more than welcome to stay, I think, if you'd like. but you-
Samantha.
Okay, moving right on to the agenda. Our second item is Public Works, the 2020 surplus equipment and material auction. Do you want to take this, Michelle?
No, I'll take it,
Oh, I
Chair.
didn't see you there, David. Okay.
Yeah. So with respect to the December 30th report from the purchasing and mechanical superintendent, the city did go through an auction process, a public process for the perspective of selling some equipment and other material that the city no longer has use for. And with that, there is a recommendation for you to proceed with the disposal of those city assets other than the 2014 Buick Encore, which we believe we can get higher value if we go through another process and sell it on the open market. So that's a recommendation before you. And with respect to the financial consideration, they had sort of budgeted to recover $9,500 minus the car, and we're coming in at about $13,799. So all in all, it's a favorable for the city, and we do get some additional revenue by proceeding in this manner.
Mhm.
Any questions of David on this item?
No, could we see the agenda though? Normally you have the agenda coming up too.
Didn't you have one delivered to you, Robert?
No, but I'm just saying, but normally you have the agenda on the side. Is it not going to be coming up like that or no? No.
I don't think the intention was to have the agenda on the screen
Okay, that's
because
fine.
the intention is to have our public who wants to view this, seeing the counselors front and center.
Okay, no, that's fine.
David, what's happening with the vehicle, unless this is it, that we had for Citizens on Patrol?
Yeah, Chair Santori, that is the Citizens on Patrol vehicle, the 2014 Buick.
Okay. So could we have, did we have a motion? I can't remember.
Not yet.
Okay, we need a motion to dispose of,
So move.
moved by Eleanor, seconded by
Well.
all those in favor?
Aye.
The motion is carried. Next item on the agenda is a request to proceed with grant applications for the decommissioning of Cambridge and Violent Lake dams, as well as the restoration of the ecosystem associated with both of those watersheds. David?
Yeah, so there's this grant opportunity, as mentioned, the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. Staff considered the program in terms of priority project and what would be the best fit. And through discussions, staff felt that this project, which council's well aware of in terms of decommissioning the reservoir and the Violent Lake Dam, was the best project, recognizing the high value of the project and also the fact that almost 100% of the money would be returned to the city if the project is successful from the grant perspective. I don't really have much more to add other than that, but a council resolution is required in order for the city to finalize the grant application, and that's what we're asking for today.
Okay. Any questions of David before the motion? Lisa?
I'll move the motion and then I have a question.
Moved by Lisa, seconded by
Second, Robert.
Robert. Go ahead, Lisa.
David, so it says the anticipated project schedule is July 15th to 21st, but that's not the entire project. Is it not a phased project? So I know the whole project itself has a very high price tag, but is our grant asking for just the first phase or the phase that is going to be completed in 2021?
The grant would cover all costs, so whether or not it sort of straddles another year and goes into 2022, I think that would be, I guess, subject to review depending on whether or not the grant application is successful. From the perspective of the schedule, I believe that that's sort of more of the infrastructure removal, but you're right, there's other remediation and other issues that would have to be addressed as well. But they have been slowly draining the reservoir, so they'd have to remove the saddle dam and do some physical work up there. And I think that that's what the proposed schedule is, to do that work between July and October of this year if the grant application is successful.
Thank you.
Robert?
Is that, once it's done, is it going to be flowing backwards back down into the States like it did before? Will that take out the back one too?
Yeah, that's my understanding is it will be returned to its natural form. So
Really?
the water that drains into, I guess, the trail side would be
Yeah.
very minimal and the majority would be going south.
So it'll be exactly like it was in 50 or 100 years
Yeah.
ago.
You're
Okay,
correct.
thank
Yes.
you.
Yeah.
And just one last question. Why is the rate so high on that? I mean, I know we've seen some regional district rates of 90%, but I've never seen a rate that high in terms of a grant.
And I can't speak to that other than the fact that I guess government's sort of getting more aggressive as far as trying to get money out to communities that need it and see these projects go from an economic perspective. So I don't know the rationale, but from the city's perspective anyways, if we're successful, it would be a huge win for us in terms of getting this done and not having to take money out of our water fund to do that.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Okay, thanks, David.
David, the project will only proceed if the grant is successful this year, though?
Yeah, this time there'll be no, we'll put out the funding that we need to sort of cover ourselves off as far as the grant is concerned, which is about 145 grand, but the overall project would not proceed if the grant's not successful. We're gonna have to look at it then and determine how to best fund it and when it would fit. So it may be delayed potentially years, depending on what other projects and priorities come forward.
Thank you. So we have a motion by Lisa, seconded by Robert. All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing no opposition, motion has been carried. Next is, before you is a decision on cemetery fees and charges, and I'm guessing this is Michelle.
No, it's me again.
Ah, right, a 50-50 chance again.
Yeah, the 50-50, yeah, you lose. So anyways, the cemetery fees and charges were reviewed as part of the overall budget this year. And with that, basically looked at comparative communities and saw where sort of trails stood. In addition to that, we looked at our internal costs, and it was very clear that our rates of lag are sort of fallen behind, given the fact that we haven't made an adjustment in quite a few years. So in terms of the methodology that I'm advancing to council as far as the recommended rate is concerned, what I did was I took the average of the other 5 communities that we surveyed and then basically throttled that back by 15%. To do that, I just thought that it's sort of, I guess, respects the fact that we hadn't done an increase in some time and also puts us a little bit below the overall average group, but it does result in a significant move upwards, given some of our rates were really lagging behind. And if you do have the report in front of you, within the financial considerations, you can see the little table there that shows the actual fees and what our cost is to provide the service. So in most cases, we're seeing a fairly significant deficit as far as funding that through the tax requisition. So if you look at those new fees, if council agrees to support them, we'll have to bring a bylaw forward. And in addition to that, Michelle has advised me that staff would like to bring forward a few small amendments to the bylaw that deal with the niche plaques and adding the columbarium into Schedule D. So that would sort of be captured within the bylaw amendment. But what I'm looking at right now, I just sort of ran some rough numbers based on 2020 usage and purchases. And if council again proceeds, we're probably looking at about a $4,000 to $6,000 increase in revenue. So that gives us some cushion and comfort as far as the regional district requisition is concerned, and sort of gets us more modernized in terms of our fees, which again are lagging behind. So if council does agree, the recommendations are there that we would advance the bylaw and also make the regional district aware directly as our primary funder of the proposed changes, and then again bring forward the bylaw as required.
Any questions of David?
Yeah, I have one, Sandy.
Go ahead, Paul.
Just looking at the proposed fees, is there, I understand that you've brought it back by 15%. What about not as going as deep as 15%, but say something like 10%? Some of these fees are actually less expensive than it is to cremate an animal.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a political decision. Obviously, you could choose to sort of move the rates up more aggressively.
Yeah.
Again, it is a sensitive area, and in past, I think council sort of said, well, sort of morbid to say, but the cost of death is so significant that, how do we sort of balance that in the context of the fees that we charge? And so that's why I sort of took that methodology. But again, you're right, Councillor Butler, that some of the fees do remain low, but we're not in the cremation business. That's dealt with by the funeral provider. We're just dealing with the actual cremated remains. So that's why those costs are probably a little bit less. We just get the urn in the urn box, and the city just puts it in the ground for the family. So that's why that cost is probably
But
viewed to be
They're
low.
still they're very reasonable.
Yeah, I believe so. Yes.
Any other? Lisa?
So I was thinking a little bit along the same lines of Councillor Butler. I think it's appropriate this year that we give a 15% decrease, because we are making a significant increase to compensate for many years of not having increases. And so we're getting closer to market value average. But I would like to just ask that we make a note next year that potentially our rates, seeing how our budget ends, are considered to move up to market average versus market average minus 15%. I'm prepared to move the motion that is captured in the recommendation under 3.1.
Okay, do we have a seconder?
I can second that.
I'll second it, Eleanor.
Okay. Dave, just a question digressing here. What's the occupancy rate of the mausoleum right now?
I'd have to defer to Michelle on that. I'm not aware. I think it's fairly, like, there's vacancy, if you want to say that, but I can't speak to the actual percentage full versus not full.
Would you know, Michelle?
I'll just add, I haven't looked at it this year or in 2020, so I would have to update the statistics, and I can send that out to all of council.
Okay, I'm just curious more than anything. Okay, we have a motion. All those in favor?
No, I have a question, Sandy.
Oh, go ahead, Carol. I didn't see you. Sorry.
I don't know how to do this. I just want to piggyback on what Lisa said about looking at this in a year, but one of the last points in this report was that we review this every 2 years. Could we include that in the motion?
To review rates and charges, considering the 15% reduction to bring it up to market rate average next year in, I guess, 2022 budget review.
Okay, so I just would like to see either that put in, or under other considerations 8.2, it suggested that going forward, council may wish to consider reviewing rates every 2 years in order to minimize the level of increase, et cetera, et cetera. So
let's just build that in. I'm comfortable building into the motion if you are, Councillor Dobie, and just asking for an annual review or another review next year.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
This is amended the motion. I think it was Eleanor that seconded. You okay with that, Eleanor?
Yeah,
Okay,
I agree.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. Next item on the agenda is a request from Dean Esposito for exclusive use of metered parking spaces. And you have the recommendation before you. Michelle?
Yes, you got it.
You got it.
Chair Santori. Dean Esposito is the property owner of 1425 Bay Avenue, and she has advanced a request to council to be permitted the exclusive use of metered parking spaces adjacent to her property for her use and those of her tenants. Council will recall, particularly with the revitalization of downtown properties.
Michelle, Lisa, can you take this? I just got somebody at the door for a second.
Yes, I can.
I'll be right back.
We have seen requests from the downtown property owners and businesses requesting exclusive use of parking. And back in 2012, council did adopt council policy GG 004.5 related to the business use of city parking spaces, so that certain properties could be provided with exclusive use of parking with an associated fee. But it was very important that that advantage be limited to only particular properties, being that if all of the downtown properties were allowed to take advantage of that, we wouldn't then have any metered parking spaces generally available for customers of all of the businesses. And so the two limitations that were embedded into the council policy were that it was open only to larger retailers or service providers. So those buildings that have a one-story building area that exceeds 600 square meters, or in the case of apartment buildings that were multi-unit, having 10 or more residential units, they were also eligible to make application for this exclusive use. It is understood that Dina Esposito has recently undertaken some renovations to the 4 residential units that she has on the upper floor. So she has her commercial business operating at Cafe Americano and 4 residential suites above. When she was first in touch with the city requesting the parking, she had indicated that she was completed her renovations and looking to secure some long-term tenants who would be needing nearby parking. When she advanced her communications and correspondence through to council, you will notice that she's indicated that she may propose to offer the suites for a nightly rental as a boutique hotel. But in any case, she is indicating that she would need nearby parking. Unfortunately, though, the square footage of Ms. Esposito's property does not meet the policy requirements. She has an approximate floor area of 440 square meters, so she's not eligible with respect to the size of her business, nor is she eligible as an apartment building having 10 or more suites. So while council can consider exceptions to the policy, staff would suggest you only do that if there's some extenuating circumstances that would warrant that. And regrettably, in Ms. Esposito's case, staff would suggest that there's just nothing that would justify that. In her correspondence, she did note, and she made mention that she has lost 3 parking spaces behind her building as a result of the construction of the Crown Columbia and the Riverfront Center parking lots. But I did want to clarify that, in fact, that parking behind her building was not impacted by our construction. The travel portion of the laneway was reduced by a sidewalk, but what's impacting the ability of people to park behind her building is a concrete step that is affixed to her building, and it juts out towards the laneway, and it prevents vehicles from parking parallel to her premise in the laneway. So despite her indication that she's lost the 3 parking spaces, that parking was never there and available for her use because of the concrete step that's on her property. So with all of that said, unfortunately, it is staff's recommendation that this request from Ms. Esposito for the exclusive use of the 4 metered parking spaces be denied.
Comments, questions from council members?
Well, yeah, it's unfortunate
Sorry,
though,
Robert.
because we're looking for, as many sort of spots for whatever kind of people who want to have new apartments or whatever it happens to be. And, I would be myself, I would be in favor of granting 2 permanent spots. Those will be full and she'll be paying for them. You got no idea whether in that particular section, how much you're making out of those anyways. You may make very little, and they're close to her business or right next to her business. So the only business they may really impact is Dina's business. So, I mean, I don't want to go for 4, but I would go for 2.
Carol?
I just wanted to ask Michelle, do you know if she removes that concrete cement step at the back, will that open it up for more parking?
Yes, she would. So right now there's less than 5 feet between the concrete step and the white line that depicts where vehicles can parallel park in the lane. If she were to remove that step, she would have adequate width as the other properties along that block do.
And would she be able to get 2 vehicles in there then, or just 1?
Likely 3.
Yeah.
parallel. Yeah,
Okay.
depending, there is also a dumpster there that I suspect is for her own business. So she would be able to get at least two vehicles if she were to remove the concrete step. And speaking to Councillor Kashoni's suggestion, I just do want to caution you that there are many other downtown properties that do have residential apartments above. So even just across the street at the Double Happiness Restaurant, where they are providing their restaurant on the main floor, similar to Ms. Esposito, they have residential above, and they've often been in touch inquiring about parking privileges. So I just want you to be cautious in allowing the exclusive use of parking outside of the policy parameters, because you will hear from others who would, I think, wish similarly.
Yeah.
So I'd like to put a motion on the floor that we allow her 2 parking spaces, but only for 1 year. And during that year, she needs to remove that cement abutment from the back so she can open it up to 3 parking spaces.
Second.
Any other, Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Santori. I mean, I won't support that. I think we're going to be opening up to a pretty dangerous precedent, considering our limited parking in downtown. What I really liked about her letter, what was put forward, is that she was willing to try to secure parking behind the building in the small parking lot that the City of Trail has near the Library Museum. So clearly, you know, she has the willingness to be able to pay for parking, and that parking lot for us is full, and there is a wait list in all our parking. I would like to see her go and speak to Mr. LaRose and his group. He's got a massive parking lot right behind that is basically empty, and maybe she can work with him to have a monthly or daily use rate in that parking lot, whereby potentially the needs of both businesses would be met, and the City of Trail wouldn't have to compromise the policy, which could then open us up to greater issues with other requests being made.
Any other comments?
Well, I have no problem in opening it up to other people too. I mean, if you go downtown, at least now, I don't see a lot of vehicles, at least when I go through town. Only at certain places you see a lot of vehicles. Other places, there's a lot of empty spots right now, and may well be for years to come. You don't even know what kind of businesses are going to be there. So anybody who wants to, we can look at them as a one-off basis. Just because we have a policy doesn't mean we need to slavishly adhere to that particular policy. I think given that you have a business person who wants to improve the downtown in terms of residential base, I think I would like council to approve it.
And could we not add that, what Lisa has just mentioned, into the motion, that she has 2 options here? If we give her the 2 parking spots for 1 year, that she needs to pursue alternate parking, probably, as we suggested with Brian LaRose, and also to open up her back parking herself, and that within the 1 year period, then we take back those 2 spots. I think that's an indication that we're trying to help her, and we're also giving her some alternate suggestions.
Chair Santori, I will just add that I have suggested that she consult with the LaRose family around the availability of parking there. So that has been suggested to her.
Any other comments? Go ahead.
I just have a comment. I actually took a drive down the alley because I wanted to see what she was talking about. My concern would be that step is coming out of a door, is it not?
Yeah.
So that would be a safety issue if you take that step away, unless I guess she downsizes it. And I would say that, you know, I don't know, I just think it's a safety issue because we know that alley is very busy with street people. I mean, you know, she has a restaurant open out that back door. I understand that. I just think that, you know, we want to be really careful when we suggest that she do these renovations. I mean, that cost could really affect her business, as well as the the safety issues back there. I mean, the two parking spaces in the front, I understand that we've already turned down a couple of businesses just in the last little while because they had requested parking spaces outside their buildings, but their buildings were smaller and they were short-term customer service businesses, right? They were getting a haircut or zipping in for a coffee or something. I don't know. I think my concern would be the safety issue back there. And I don't know if changing the policy to allow her for 2 parking spaces would, if it's just for a year until she can get that resolved. I know that Dina's done a lot of work trying to stay above ground right now through COVID and just trying to get her business going and keeping it going. And, you know, I think it would be nice if we could show a little bit of support. That's it.
Question. Any other comments? I'll add my 2 bits worth. And, you know, while there may not be a significant parking problem, I would have to concur with Michelle. I think, I mean, you've got the old Bank of Commerce, the McLaughlin building. There are several there with residential suites. The Arlington Hotel has suites. And if the demand continues for rental property and you see more and more 2 stories converting, it's going to be very hard to say no to those people. And we will create a problem. I mean, we can't base it on just the couple that came forward. There's potentially a lot more that haven't come forward that will. As far as that back step is concerned, my understanding it's for deliveries only. There can be temporary steps that can be removed and then put back when they're receiving deliveries. I don't know. If I was a business next door who counts on people coming and going and 4 residents or 2 residents or whatever the council proceeds with, I would be pretty annoyed that I can't find that I don't have parking for my patrons. So I know we want to be good to Dina and try to be helpful, but then you're going to create a hardship for the businesses next door who are counting on those. And if there are facilities where they're back to back, where you get 2 buildings, both with apartments, you could potentially have 8 less parking spots in front of day-to-day businesses. And they're suffering from COVID just as much as Dina Esposito is. So I don't know. I just think we're opening up a whole can of worms here that doesn't need to be opened. Anyways, any other comments?
No, I'll make the last comment. I know, Sandy, I appreciate what you're saying, but it's mere speculation. If other businesses are interested in bringing forth their proposals, we should be looking at them individually. As to the step, that's extraneous to the motion. In reality, it shouldn't even be in the motion. Motion is give her opportunity to have 2 spots at least to hopefully make that business successful without contributing to the demise of another business. And, you know, policy, once again, it's not, policy is there. Policy has been changed. I know at the regional district, policy is changed almost on a monthly basis to meet the requirements of what's happening. So I just think the 2 spots isn't going to kill anybody.
I get that, Robert. But we've bent from policy before, but I think if you set this precedence, trying to deal with them on an individual cases, I don't know on what basis we could deny someone else under the same circumstances going forward. Yeah, we can, but to say yes to one and no to the other when the circumstances
Everything froze up.
becomes very difficult.
Just remember, this is
Everything
for
froze up
1
there.
year.
So, pardon?
That's what the motion was. We allow her the 2 spots for 1 year.
That was the other point I wanted to bring up. It doesn't take a year to break a slab of concrete. I can go break that down in less than an hour.
Well, let's make it 6 months.
Well, let the motion stand. We don't have to keep making
Counselor-
adjustments.
Okay, well, we've got a motion on the
Santori.
floor. Let's take it to a vote. All those in
Counselor
favor?
Counselor Santori,
Yes.
Counselor Butler's had his hand up for a while. Can you please address his
okay.
question?
Sorry, Councillor Santori. And this is probably more a question for either David or Michelle, but on the far side of the street, it's parallel parking versus angled parking. Is there, I know it'd be a lot more work to do it, but is there enough room to make the opposite side of the street
Angle.
angled parking, pardon me, yes. And then that would ultimately, I think, bring in more parking spaces in that area.
That's correct. But because Bay Avenue is considered not only a bus, but the trucking route, it is required to have a slightly greater traveled width for the laneways. So although we've seen Cedar Avenue, we've been able to convert the parking on both sides. We are somewhat limited on Bay Avenue because it does serve as a truck route.
As a major route, okay.
Okay, if there's anybody else, because I've only got 5 of you on the screen here, so. Okay. the
Where's
motion-
Alan?
Motion is 2 spots, 1 year. So it's limited to the 1 year?
Yes, that's what I said.
Okay, my question is if Dina comes back and says, well, I'm not going to remove those stairs or I can't remove those stairs, does she still get the 2 spots?
No,
But
it's limited to
just
1
point of
year.
order, Sandy, we can't be debating whether Dina does this or does that. We're just voting on the motion.
Sorry, Robert, with all due respect.
Well,
she's-
you know, okay, if you're gonna do that, when other things come up, then I'll be doing the same thing. I'll be
Well,
making.
Robert, I'm just asking, I think it's a legitimate
No,
question.
it's not a legitimate question at all, Sandy. Not at all. Not at all.
You,
You may think it is.
Chair
but I don't think it is.
As I recorded the motion that was made by Councillor Doby, it indicates that council agreed to allow 2 parking spaces for a 1-year period to enable the removal of the concrete step. That was
Right.
the wording that Councillor Doby put forward.
Okay.
If that was not the intent, then I would need to be so advised.
exactly, and that's my point. My point is, now we're providing her with an option. That option is, we will give you 2 to give you a year to remove those steps.
Could we change that then to allow her to find alternate parking?
Can I finish my argument first? Because
Sorry, Sandy.
Robert says they're not tied. Well, if she tomorrow says, well, that's not feasible for me, I need it for delivery, and I'm not going to replace the steps, I just want the 2 spots. So that change, to me, you're making it conditional, right, Carol? You're saying, we'll give you the 2 spots to give you time to remove the stairs. If she has no intent to remove the stairs tomorrow or next week or next month, does she still get the 2 spots?
Well, maybe we should ask in the motion that she contact us. Is that agreeable to her? Because if she says, no, it's not, maybe that should be in the motion. And if she says it's not, then she doesn't get the 2 spots. Does that make sense? Or we're making this too wordy?
It's pretty wordy.
Well,
Counselor,
that's not generally how motions are structured.
Councillor
We're
Santori.
negotiating on the motion.
Counselor Santori.
Yes, go ahead, Lisa.
So I think this is getting a bit muddy for sure. And I agree with Counselor Jones that it's really not our position to be instructing her what to do with those stairs, whether to take them out, whether to have something temporary in there. She can work with city staff if she's got questions about that and what options are, but I would hate for the city to put a motion forward that increases us up to potential liability for stair removal and someone goes out the front door and falls off. You know, I don't know, I'm just speculating, but the request forward was to provide parking spots. That was it. It's not about construction of her building. I think it's not my motion. I already told you I wouldn't be in favor of it, but I think it would be safe for the city to take the whole discussion about stairs out of that motion. We can suggest again that she speak to Mr. LaRose and try to come to an agreement to get her full complement of it. But I think getting into bricks and mortar discussion with a simple request for parking meter spaces is treading on interesting ground here that maybe we don't want to go down that way.
On that, I'm recommending as the chair that, Carol, for you to drop the motion. And if you want to make another motion for 4 spots, 3 spots, 2 spots, or 1 spot, council can entertain that motion and we will vote based on the direct request, which was for 4. If we want to give her 4, let there be a motion for 4. If someone wants 3 or 2 or 1, and we'll make our decision based on, in response to her request. Are you okay with that, Carol?
Yes, so I can withdraw that motion then, and I'll put a motion on the floor that we allow her.
Is that okay, Robert? And we just
No
entertain?
problem.
Okay, so now, does anybody want to make a motion to deny or a motion or to accept the recommendation, or does somebody want to make a different motion?
Okay, I'd like to put the motion out on the floor then that we give her a 2-year parking space or a 2-stall parking space for exactly 1 year to allow her time to make alternate arrangements.
Second,
Okay, we've heard the discussion.
Sandy, can I just, I miss, are we still on Dina Esposito?
yeah,
Okay, because I got lost here.
Any other discussion? You have the motion before you. All those in favor of the motion?
aye,
Robert, Carol? Anybody else in favor? All opposed?
Aye.
Motion's defeated. And now we move to item 4.1, the operating budget overview or review. David?
Thank you. So what I intend to do here is I'll reference my report, but I will be sharing my screen to sort of guide council through the budget review. Just to sort of set it up here, when we presented the provisional numbers in December, I asked council how you wanted to go through the process this year, recognizing the challenges associated with Zoom and just dealing with a budget that for the most part is a static budget. There is some change obviously in it given the increase being proposed, but for the majority of it, it can be explained quite simply. So with that, I will share the first screen here, which is part of your report. And it just shows, this is the expenditure side of the budget. So if you sort of track down to the net change, the net change in expenditures is an increase of $54,700 or 0.27% over the 20,000.
You're referring to, David? It's easier to follow then.
Pardon me? Oh, which page? So this is on page 33 of 50 in your
Got it. Thank you.
package.
Got it.
So again, you're looking at a very marginal increase in the overall expenditures this year. So what that tells us then, if we're looking to increase the levy by some $400,000, it's to be precise here, it's $427,950. So that means we've lost some revenue in order to sort of achieve a balance, and that revenue is primarily lost in the context of the transfer from the reserve surplus, which council did last year when they went to a 0% budget increase. Council was made aware that with respect to balancing the budget last year, we had to bring money in from prior year surplus, but then it would be sort of kicked out the next year. So with that, that's sort of the primary driver for the budget increase this year, and it consumes some 70% of the overall increase of the budget this year. So just wanted to sort of set the stage with respect to that. And unless there's any questions, my intention would be just to quickly run through the tables that I've provided, which start on page 35 of 50. So I do see Councillor Dobie's hand up.
Go ahead, Carol.
Yeah, David, I have just a couple of quick questions here. On page 32, when we have, just so that I'm understanding this, because I'm a little bit lost, on revenue, we have transfer from own reserve funds as 340, but under expenditures, we're showing it as 999. Where did the rest of the money go?
Well, it's a total. It has a totally different meaning. On the revenue side, what that is a transfer to effectively balance the budget, because what we're saying is the budget is not specifically funded fully. So we're taking money from our savings account to achieve a balance, which is required by legislation. The 999, not 550, is an actual expense amount. So that amount is money is being transferred to various statutory funds and other funds, and that money is an expense in that respect. And basically, we spend all that every year. So money is being again transferred to different reserves and different funds. And when we get into the expenditure side of the review, I do have a slide on that, so you'll be able to see where that money is all going.
Okay, so another just quick question on page 33. Point 15, is that environmental or economic?
Environmental.
Okay, because we've got environmental health services and then environmental development services.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, so then I'll stop sharing this one and I'll just start the other one here, which just give me a minute. Give me 1 sec here, folks. Okay, here we go. So what we'll do then is we'll just start with the expenditure side, and in previous years, what we've done
I don't
is
see
we've
anything
gone,
in there, David. I'm just seeing
Yeah.
new
Cartoons.
to working from home.
you don't see the general government?
No,
No,
Okay, I'll stop the share and I'll try it again. Again, give me 1 second here. Okay. Should work. We even did a practice run. So I'll try it again. Do you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So again, we'll start with general government, and that's just sort of rolling through the various expenditure categories. So with that, just sort of focusing on prior years. In prior years, council would pass or make a motion for each expenditure section. This year, what I'm proposing is we'll go through all the various expenditures and then just make one motion at the end to capture whatever council's decided going through the presentations. But with that said, if you want to make any immediate amendments to the budget based on the strategic questions or discussion that's brought forward, I think it would be appropriate to do that when we hit that various sections. So starting on general government, which is in your budget manual, if you have that handy as well at your desk, it's on page 23. This expenditure area is showing an increase of 64,650. And I've got down below here the primary sort of drivers, which is dealing with our information systems and cost increases in various maintenance contracts, as well as expansion of various programs that we're using. A lot of stuff we're starting to go into the cloud. So this has come through our IT manager who's indicating we should expect these cost increases, which again sort of explains the majority of the 64,650 increase. I will say that this budget, unlike last year, does not include funding for the purpose of the organizational review and any amendments or adjustments that may be potentially required in the future. Right now, suggesting there could be an exposure of up to $250,000 depending on how council chooses to proceed and what they want to implement. We don't have that study or review in front of council as of yet, but preliminary sort of indications are there may be a requirement to consider adding some additional staff, and with that will be some cost considerations. So if you don't make any adjustment this year and the organizational review does kick in where there are future amendments, then you're looking at a more potentially significant cost increases in other years, which would affect obviously your property tax levy. So that's all I have to say about general government, unless there's any questions, or again, if council wants to talk potentially about the strategic discussion there.
go ahead, Lisa.
Okay. It's almost too bad that this comes out at the very front, because it's kind of hard to have that discussion without seeing the rest of the basic operational budget. But I would just like to confirm that hopefully within the next month, we're going to have some work being done in person with Brentwood coming up here if the weather complies. So we can have those discussions as a strategic group, and then also as a council on what this looks like and what our options are. So realizing that this isn't the day that we need to make a decision on the budget, I think it would probably be in our best interest to create, to just keep in mind that we're probably going to have to do a phasing in of some funds to ensure that we're not having a really significant increase in the next 2 or 3 years. But again, really hard for us to have that discussion until we have the broader discussion. So I don't know if we want to circle back to it at the end of today, or just, I'd like to flag this as something that we as a collective group need to come back to, because I really think there's going to be some adjustments needed here.
Robert?
well, I've never seen any indication so far anywhere that we're going to be adding staff. Where did that come from?
Well, again, Councillor
I didn't see
Kashani
anything, nothing, not a word
indicated
about it.
that we've retained Brentwood, and Brentwood
Right.
through the steering committee, and I guess more working directly with the mayor and myself, are starting to sort of trickle out their findings. So the intention is to get a report in front of the steering committee, as Mayor Payson has indicated, within the next month or so, and then it would come through to council. But you know, dealing, I guess, specifically even with the CAO, CFO position, you know, I don't think it's any secret that Trail's unique with respect to how that structure is currently in place. And they're definitely, one of the recommendations coming forward will be to consider splitting that position. So with that, there's going to be some costs associated with that. But again, it's too preliminary, I guess, to sort of talk about, because there isn't even a draft report completed as of yet. But again, we're hoping to see that within the next few weeks. And then ideally it'll get in front of the steering committee and then in front of all of council, as what council understood or directed last year.
Any questions? Okay, go ahead, David.
So moving on then, the next one is protective services, which is on page 28 of your budget manual. This is primarily the RCMP. So you can see the 1.38% increase. And basically those are numbers provided to the city by the province, who deals with the cost of providing RCMP. So you can see that the cost has actually increased only marginally. We do estimate or factor in a 93%. So what we say is while we retain 14 members under contract, we expect that we'll only be billed up to 93% because members unfortunately are off-duty sick and take other sorts of leaves that the city's not billed for directly. So we do have a potential exposure if all 14 members were in place 100% of the time of about $127,000 or $128,000, but we've never seen that actually occur. So I think it's safe to assume that 93% gives us enough of a buffer. And further to that, we have accrued money to deal more specifically with the RCMP unionized contract. So they've said, okay, when this contract's signed, they're looking at some retroactive pay and some other changes to the cost structure, but the city has already put money aside to deal with that. So it won't necessarily hit a future expenditure budget. So that is the police budget in a nutshell. We're not proposing any changes to the members or staffing or anything at this point. It's just a status quo budget with the increase as per the provincial invoice, I guess. And further to that, we've increased with respect to our internal staff and the 2% that was negotiated with the union last year.
Any questions to David on protective services?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. Carol, go ahead.
Yeah, I have one question, David. Okay, so on that one line, it says 2021-22 cost per member. Does that include that amount that we're going to get hit with on the contract?
Well, yeah, the contract cost is going up to $186,559 per member versus the $183,790. So there's a $27.69 difference year over year.
Okay.
With respect to the unionized contract, what I tried to explain was that they've already given us an estimate of what our costs will be. And through the last couple of years, we've accrued that. So we have money basically set aside. So it's not going to affect the budget directly, other than when the unionized contract is signed, the cost per member may escalate to $195,000 per year. So you'll face that in the year that the contract is signed. But at this point in time, any retroactivity will be covered or is already covered. And we do have money in an accrued liability account to cover our costs, or our estimated costs, based on advice we received from the province.
Thank you.
Okay, then not seeing any other questions coming forward. Moving into transportation services then. This budget increases $72,250. And again, there's no changes in service levels here. All we're dealing with is labor cost adjustments and other cost adjustments for utilities and equipment. So nothing, I think, sort of sticks out in terms of the transportation services. It's just a status quo budget, and adjustments have been made to continue to provide the same level of service.
Any questions on transportation? Okay, not hearing any. On to the next one, David. Cemetery? No.
Environmental health, that's the garbage service or the primarily. So we deal with the contract for residential pickup, the tipping fees, and the garbage discounts are factored into this expenditure account as well, further to what we give on the utility bill. So the only sort of strategic, I think, discussion or question, again, we've talked about it in the past, is we provide a high level of service where people are allowed to put out 2 receptacles per week. And with the organics sort of on the horizon, I guess the question through the council, not necessarily recommending a change, but if you want to sort of look at that, is should we go from 2 to 1? And further to that, we levy an annual fee. Other municipalities try to go on a user fee basis. They sell tags and do other things. So we haven't really looked specifically at that, but it's just put out there as a strategic sort of issue if council wants to talk about it. But from the perspective of the budget, council will recall you've approved the garbage rate and it was on the basis of this expenditure amount. So the utility bills are printed and going out as we speak. So there shouldn't be any change specifically in the 2021 expenditure account. And again, just sort of throwing out the whole ideas around reducing garbage going into landfill and if the city should be taking any action to deal with that.
Any comments, Lisa? Go ahead.
So David, can you please just confirm that under the line that says strategic discussion, is that a typo where it says organics, recycling advanced and other recycling provided is a 2-week container limit reasonable? Is that supposed to say 2 per week?
Yeah, 2 per week. Sorry, there's a line missing there.
Thank you. Thank you. And I would like to look at this and try to keep it top of mind for when we get the organics, because I think it makes a lot of sense that if an RDKB organics proposal is coming forward, the volume of that organics should be going into the organics and away from the trash. So I think at that time, it makes sense with the implementation of the organics to potentially cut down. But I would be a little bit hesitant to do it in advance and then potentially have an issue with dumping, illegally dumping, because we're cutting down to 1 trash can. But if we're giving a firm mechanism to make up that differential, we can look at it then. So in the next year or 2, I would imagine.
Any other comments? Okay, not hearing any. We'll move on to environmental health services.
And this one is the cemetery, as you've indicated, Chair Santori. So with respect to the strategic discussion, council did discuss the rates earlier today and have made a decision in that regard. So that's all looking fine. The budget itself has been submitted to the Regional District of Kootenay Boundary for their review and consideration. And ideally, they're going to fund to the level requested, which they've done in the past. With the new rate structure, we will recover some additional revenue. So there will potentially be some savings with respect to the potential tax levy, but we don't know specifically what that looks like right now. But we will be advising the RDKB on the decision to amend the rate. So with that, again, it's a status quo budget. There's not really a lot of change there. It's just dealing with the service and the cost adjustments is required.
Any questions of David on this?
No.
Next.
Environmental development, this is sort of the planning area. And what we have here is the contract with the LCIC for the 3 years. So that's funded. There is no change in the 2020 to the 2021 year. So that shows a 0. And what I've done is with respect to sort of dealing with COVID, recognizing we're still sort of in the throes of trying to complete the OCP, I've reduced the planning account, where we have money to do various internal studies and plans by 15,000. So that goes from 95 down to 80,000. I think that still provides comfortable amount of funding, but the goal here was to try to reduce wherever possible without directly impacting services to try and keep our tax levy to a reasonable level of increase. So that reduction was made by staff, and I just sort of put it out there if council has any concerns with that, but I think it's reasonable, again, in the context of the plan going forward and the fact that COVID will still sort of limit our ability to do certain things until things sort of change more for the entire population and the provincial health orders start to loosen up. So that's environmental development in a nutshell.
Any questions? I just have a comment. I mean, I looked at the report from LCIC on the other agenda, and I don't know what other councillor members think, but I mean, we're into it for another 3 years, but I see nothing but fluff and buzzwords within that whole report. And we did ask for a different form of reporting and maybe some more specifics, but it's as fluffy now as it's ever been. You know, I mean, how many times do we have to hear business retention, expansion? This isn't a program that goes on for life, but, and no, you know, I would like some specifics without names, you know, where they got involved, where a business actually expanded as a result of assistance, or a business that they actually retained that was going under or was thinking of moving, or they managed a transfer of or a sale of businesses. We're not getting any of that. And like I said, there's a lot of fluff and very, very little substance at all in that report. But I'm digressing here, but Lisa?
Yeah, I was just going to indicate that I was going to prompt council to provide me some feedback at the regularity meeting, because I believe that item is on the agenda, and
Yeah.
then I can compile that. I mean, he's willing to look for feedback. As they said, that's the first run of the new reporting. So I think they'd be open to that, and I can compile it, but I think we need to table that discussion and get through, revert back to the budget here and leave that for regular council, if you don't mind.
No, it was an item on this expenditure, and I just thought I'd throw my 2 bits worth in, not for debate. Okay, moving right along.
Okay, so in the recreation, which is obviously one of our bigger expense areas, and this area has been most directly impacted by COVID-19 from the perspective of revenue loss. So fortunately, we were able to, or not able to, but we did receive money from the province to deal with the COVID impacts, and that amount is $2.115 million. So we don't know specifically how much would be brought into 2020 to deal with the impacts of revenue loss, but there'll be sufficient money definitely in 2021 to deal with the loss of revenue being projected in the recreation services area. So you can see the top part of the sort of the income statement here, a condensed income statement, shows revenue losses of estimated at $353,400. And then we have some money coming in from the province of $242,800. And then we do have some additional money from the Warfield Recreation Agreement as well. So if you sort of track that through in terms of the operating expenses, 2021 versus 2020, we're looking at a $4,150 difference to the good, actually. So it's a reduction. So that service sort of remains whole. The Parks and Recreation Director has reduced costs at the Trail Aquatic and Leisure Center. That service is sort of most directly impacted. I think the department's doing a great job as far as trying to make services available to the public. You know, they've changed their booking processes, and you can't sort of just show up at the pool anymore. You have to sort of reserve your spot, whether that's in the gym or in the pool. But for the most part, I'm told it's working well. We've got some online booking available for the public now as well. And for the most part, it's again, sort of rolling out as we expected. And with that, we haven't heard a lot of complaints, and people are sort of rolling with the punches as far as how they have to adjust as well. But again, it's working well. And I think with respect to this budget, then with that additional money coming from the province, it sort of provides us with a safety net whereby the overall service is protected, and there's no significant impact to the taxpayer this year. So the only issue I bring forward every year, it talks about sustainability and the massive amounts of money that are spent in recreation and culture, and whether or not it's something that council would ever want to sort of tackle. I know this year's probably not the best year, but again, just sort of throwing it out there that the service is very expensive to run. And it's something that the future councils may want to consider as far as service levels and how you can sort of manage an expense which is now, you know, closing in or will be well over $4 million by the time the aquatic center is fully funded again in 2022. So anyways, that's all I have to say about that. And again, I think it's a good news from the perspective of having the provincial money and be able to continue to run the department without any major impact to the taxpayer in 2021.
Any questions of David on Parks and Rec?
I have one, Councillor Santori.
Go ahead, Colleen.
David, I'm actually looking at the detailed budget that you sent in the binder on page 58.
Okay.
I'm wondering why the cost of the lifeguards and slide attendants is so high. Like, that's a huge number.
I'm just getting to that page.
Page 58, yeah.
Yeah, I'm almost there.
270.
So you're talking the 271,500?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's just basically a flow through as far as the number of hours that the facility's open and the staff that's required to run the facility in accordance with regulations and guidelines. But you do notice the 271.5 last year was 359.1, so it's actually going down by $87,600.
Yeah, I saw that.
To the service level. But again, if you track that through in terms of the number of staff required on deck and their hourly wage, basically that's all it is. It's just a calculation to cover our staffing costs.
David, I've got a question. With respect to the money we got from the province, the 2.1 million, is that being dispersed through the operations all in 1 year?
No, you can hold it, and there, my sort of in discussions with the province, there's no requirement to just spend it. They're saying, okay, here's this money. What their concern is not how quickly you get rid of it, but you're making sure that you're spending it in accordance with their direction, which is to deal with the impacts of COVID-19 and not to sort of say, oh, we've got money, we can enhance our capital plan this year. They were very sort of specific to say this money is to be used. And, you know, the examples I gave them obviously were the revenue losses that we've suffered in at the airport, in parks and recreation, and in parking. And you could say, yeah, that's exactly what the money's intended to do. But there's no timeline. I would estimate it could take, you know, 3 to 5 years, depending on how this whole pandemic tracks through to use all that money. And at the end of the day, there might be some residual, and it'll be interesting to see how the province deals with that. But I would think that between 2020 and 2021, you know, we'll be upwards of probably close to $1 million or half of it used. And then we'll just see how it goes forward after that.
So we've included about $1 million within this year's budget?
No, this year it's I think it's about 475, but we have to still reconcile our 2020 costs. And definitely we had some major revenue losses in 2020 that we didn't budget for, again, in parking, airport, and parks and rec. So I'm just thinking based on the 2021 numbers that the 2020 sort of a draw would be higher, probably over 500,000. So if you take the two years together, you're looking at about $1 million or half of the money that the province has allocated in the first 2 years.
Okay, thanks, David. Any Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, but you know, I noticed you only took 400 and something thousand out this year, but does that account for like even the cleaning supplies that we had to put into the city hall or to transportation or whatever? I mean,
yeah, we're tracking all those costs separately. So basically what we would do in that respect is it would be a net zero. So you're not going to see that in the budget specifically. So I think I didn't look lately, but we are well over $20,000 in the context of just costs, like you say, to deal with the hand disinfectants and stuff like that. So that was just an in and an out. So we take that money, we spend it, and then we net it to zero, basically from the perspective of the money the province is giving us. So it's not going to be reflected specifically in the budget, but you'll see that in the year-end report when it shows you what the $2.115 million balance and then how it's used, because the province is directing the municipalities to include a note in the financial statements. And I think we'll have to report out to show them how we're using that money. So again, that's just it's not a direct input or direct impact in the context of the budget. So that's why you're not seeing that specifically in that revenue side. I just dealt with on the revenue side, the parking, the airport and the recreation, but not the direct expenses.
But it'll still be picked up somewhere by that.
It will be
2.1 million.
funded directly.
Yeah,
Correct.
exactly. That's what I couldn't find when I read the budget. I
No,
couldn't
you're right.
find-
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Good.
Any other questions? Are you doing the Trail Memorial Center separately or are we doing?
Well,
parks?
that's it. I'm just doing it in total. Again,
All right,
you
that's fine.
got your budget detail, but there's no material change. You know, staff were directed to keep the budgets as lean as possible. And I think that's what's been achieved here.
Okay, so if there's no more discussion on Parks and Rec, we move on to Library Cultural.
Yeah, so library and culture, you did get the presentation from Samantha earlier today. I think it would be appropriate for council to basically deal with that. And as shown on the top here, the budget impact is 0. So commendable in terms of the library that they were able to bring forward a budget with no increase. CIB, I haven't seen a budget from them, but we're basically, again, put in 110,000, which was what the 2020 budget was, recognizing that CIB took action to try to reduce that. And I haven't looked at a current GL printout, so I can't tell you where they were tracking to, but I think Councillor Dobie indicated previously that they were hoping to bring the final cost in 2020 in at about 80,000. But again, I haven't checked it, so I can't speak to that.
Sorry, I've had 2 calls into Rachel and Dan, and I haven't heard back from either one of them yet. So I don't know whether they've completed everything or they're waiting for a few more invoices to come in.
Alrighty. So, and then the other issue sort of coming forward, and I've included it within the package, is a request for funding from the Trail Historic Society. And when the city built the Riverfront Center, there was an agreement as part of taking over the museum and historical section of service that society would continue to function and that council would provide them with funding each year based on whatever their sort of needs were. So this year they're requesting a marginal amount of $3,250, which is already built into the budget and is comfortably funded. So that is that in a nutshell. The Riverfront Center is covered, and again, it's showing a small decrease. So overall, this budget's actually going down by $6,350. But I would ask council if they could deal more specifically with the library budget, if you're comfortable to approve that. And also if you can deal with the Trail Historical Society request, which is on page 49 of 50 of your agenda package.
You want a motion on those?
I preferably.
Okay. Colleen, do you have your hand up or no?
I'll move.
Moved by, is this one?
No, Sandy, sorry. Lisa had her hand up, but I also have a question.
Oh, sorry, I can't.
If I could just ask one question before I make a motion. David, would you like the library and the Historical Society moved in separate motions or in one motion?
It should be separate, I believe.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to accept the library budget as presented for the 2021 fiscal year.
Do we have a seconder?
I'll second that, but I also have a question.
Okay, is it appropriate for Colleen to second the motion if she's on the board?
Yeah, I don't see, there's no
Okay.
issue with that.
Just want to make sure. Okay, so move seconded. And you have a question, Colleen?
Well, I do. I'm just wondering where does the money show up that the library gave back to the city? 110,000 or?
Our staff is dealing with the reconciliation if you're talking about the 2020 amount.
Yeah.
So whatever savings comes through 2020, we don't know what the total is. I don't think it was quite as high as what you're indicating. I've been dealing with Mr. Merlot in that respect. So I don't have a final number, but if that expenditure amount is reduced, then basically that's a flow through to the city in the context of a surplus. So it'll sort of offset other areas of, I guess, over expenditure or revenue loss. But basically look at that on a consolidated basis, and it does just flow through. And if there is a net profit, if you want to say that at the end of the year, it would go to surplus for future years utilization.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions? Not hearing any. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
No opposition, the motion is carried. And now we need someone to move the, what was it, $3,200 for Trail Historical Society, David?
Yeah, that's correct. As per the request on page 49.
Okay, moved by Colleen.
I'll
Seconded.
second it.
I'm sorry, who was that?
Eleanor?
Okay, Eleanor, any discussion?
No.
Not hearing any. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion is carried.
Okay, then I'll move on to the next section which is debt. Debt is just our scheduled debt. The only sort of increase that we have or are budgeting for, notwithstanding the MFA debt, is costs for banking services. And we do see ongoing increases with respect to bank charges as a result of more and more people, basically all people now, all they do is pay with their credit card or debit card. So we're definitely moved away from checks and cash. So there is a cost to the city in that respect, but of course we're saving in terms of dealing with collections, bounce checks, and all the other stuff that comes with that. So it's a bit of a trade-off, but definitely a direct expense to the city. But again, it's a very marginal increase. And if you look at the total of less than 1%, that effectively deals with debt. And it's all, again, basically the MFA debt that's scheduled to be repaid.
Any questions about our debt?
Nope.
Colleen?
I don't know if it's about, thank you, Councillor Santori. I don't know if it's about our debt, but it's just a question that I thought of, because the government is going to do or changing the program, the homeowners grant program, to just be an online. You can only apply for that online now. I'm just wondering if that's going to make any changes to the cost for us to deliver that service, you know, when people come into the building, and is that going to be any benefit?
Yeah, no, there's the impact obviously is on the end person making the claim. So, and the province's desire to sort of streamline. But with respect to the money that sort of we take in from the perspective of grants and then claim back through the school tax, that's not going to change. So there's not going to be really any cost to the city. It's just going to be a different way of claiming a grant.
So I missed that. So everybody has to apply for their homeowners grant online?
You betcha.
Yeah.
There's going to be
Yeah.
a few older seniors that won't be happy about that.
No.
Wow.
Okay, so moving on then to transfer of own reserves and funds, and this sort of tracks back to the question that was asked earlier with respect to the transfer from surplus versus the expenditure side. So here's the in the bottom here, I've sort of summarized where the 999,550 goes to. It goes partly to the sewer fund, through to water based on the collection of the water parcel tax. We also, when we took in the Juanita area with the boundary extension, there was an agreement to continue to provide $30,000 in an offset to the debt that was incurred to extend the water system and provide all the residents out there with water. And then the only sort of hard transfer into reserves is for the equipment replacement. So that again totals the 999,550. And the only sort of strategic discussion again deals with the old bridge. Last year, within the 2020 budget, we put in the 350,000 for the purpose of building up a reserve to the tune of about 3.5 million to take that bridge down. That was removed when council decided to go to a 0%. And it's not in there this year, given, again, we're trying to sort of keep the tax rate to a minimum, but just throwing it out there if there's any desire to start building that reserve, or just leave it to the future. And when the bridge, I guess, has to be dealt with, it has to be dealt with. But just making council aware again that we don't have any money to deal with the bridge demolition, nor can we borrow to effectively fund the cost in the future.
Any questions?
None at all.
Yeah, so it's Eleanor. So
Yep.
David, what happens if tomorrow it falls into it collapses? What are we going to do?
Well, if it fell, I guess we'd be dealing with a sort of a different circumstance. The demolition obviously wouldn't be the issue then. It would be sort of dealing with whatever recovery costs or pollution fines or whatever we'd be dealing with there. But we do measure the bridge every year. They inspect it. They determine through a survey points if it's moving or shifting materially. So ideally, if there is some major sort of shift, we would, bring that to council's attention. We're fortunate right now that it's still standing. But again, if it fell, I can't speak to what those costs would be and what it would look like, but we would have to respond. And we've sort of thought or hoped that, maybe there'd be provincial emergency money available. Like, I don't know, we haven't researched that. And I don't think we want to be viewed as sort of waiting for it to fall. I mean, I think council is going to eventually have to deal with this issue, but staff, or at least the staff that look at that, haven't advised me that it's an urgent situation. But ideally, we would have money built up, because if you have to fund it in 1 year, I mean, that's going to basically be your capital program. You're not going to do any other capital in 1 year other than taking the bridge down. So it's a major expense, and just something, again, want to keep top of mind for council as they work through the financial plans each year.
Thank you.
Any
Okay.
other discussion on that? Okay, go ahead, David.
So municipal airport, again, there's nothing here. It's a status quo budget. We're projecting a significant loss in revenue at the top of the income statement there. So that money is being transferred or replaced with the COVID-19 provincial money. So we see a net zero as far as our revenue impacts are concerned. Expenses have gone down somewhat, dealing with fuel. We're not going to be purchasing much fuel because there's less users there, and we didn't sort of recognize any benefit. Fortunately, there weren't any fires this year, or any significant fires, but you'll recall a couple of years ago when we did make a considerable amount of money when the forests in the area were burning, and the city was able to sell a lot of fuel. But we're not projecting that for this year. So basically, we're looking at a overall sort of reduction in that budget, and there's nothing, I guess, unusual about it. We'll just keep providing the same level of service and hope over time that we see more commercial utilization as COVID-19 is addressed with the vaccine.
Any questions on the municipal airport? Lisa?
Councillor Santori, I just want to actually loop back on transfers from old reserves in the bridge, because I had my hand up. This one's a tough one. It's a tough one because we've been kind of talking about it. I've been in an elected official position for 6 years, and I think we've always been talking about it, and something always comes up that this becomes a lower priority. And, this, again, this year might not be the year, but I think it's important for us as council to potentially show intent. And so maybe it's not 350,000 we put away, but maybe it's 25,000, maybe it's 50,000, maybe it's some number in the middle that I think we need to start showing some intent to start building a reserve. Because if we keep deferring it with nothing in it, when push comes to shove, there will be nothing in it, which is going to be a significant problem. And I think you can look at it from a couple standpoints of what's more pressing and priority. But if you think about, if we would have put, I'm just picking a number, $100,000 over the last 6 years, well, that grows and builds. And then all of a sudden you have a fairly significant amount of money that you can put towards a liability. So just wanted to get that on the record to say that, but I'm not looking for a motion from council at this time.
Okay, thank you, Lisa.
Okay.
So back to the airport. Any questions on the airport?
Nope.
I have one, David, again, I'll bring it up. I think I brought it up for the last 8 years. I really don't see why it would be an issue if we were to charge a $5 airport improvement fee, which is done on many airports across the country, which would basically, on a conservative 20,000 flyers a year at 100 grand, would reduce our deficit by more than 50%. And I don't think people would balk at $5. And I know Pacific Coastal, they don't like it because it reduces their competitiveness. I think that was the rationale before. But now with the demise of Air Canada in Castlegar, and based on what I've been hearing, the likelihood of Air Canada coming back to Castlegar is not looking good. So you're going to end up with Central Mountain Air, which is comparable to Pacific Coastal, maybe a smaller and probably higher operating costs than Pacific Coastal has. I don't know if council has an appetite of implementing a $5 airport improvement fee. It can make about a a minimum of $100,000 difference in our deficit each year. And when things turn around,
If I can just comment, council did discuss this last year and provided staff with direction to explore that. We've deferred doing that just because of the COVID impacts and further to sort of the numbers you've quoted. Our passenger load is considerably lower with COVID, and we just didn't feel comfortable approaching the airline with that, because we obviously want to consult with them before implementing a fee, because they were obviously
okay,
struggling.
I either forgot or wasn't aware that conversation
Yeah.
took place.
So it's not lost, it's not forgotten, but again, we're just looking at a timing issue. And further to your other comment with respect to reducing the deficit, a capital reserve would have to offset capital, which doesn't form part of the operating budget, but it would obviously, like you indicate, even if we got $100,000 a year, that would really be helpful in the context of future capital. But I think in terms of that levy, you just have to be sort of specific in terms of the amount and what your sort of future capital expenditures are. So it's there.
Can we call it an operating fee of $5 then?
Well, then you might as well just add that to the Pacific Coastal contract, which again, we've just recently renewed. So it's just the timing for dealing with anything in airports as far as charging more is just not a good time right now. The flight users are obviously way down, so we just want to be cognizant of that and do that when the time is right.
No, that's a good point. Thank you.
Okay. So the capital fund then, and we're at the bottom of the expense side. Basically, I haven't included a change in the funding. So this $2.632 million, traditionally council has increased it by at least $50,000 a year to deal with ongoing increases in capital and being able to have some flexibility to deliver the infrastructure program. Costs obviously increase. So if that a number remains static, you're effectively doing less work because of the inflationary pressures associated with again, the delivery of various projects. So, I just thrown it out there and sort of quoted some potential impacts at 65,850, which is a 2.5% increase of the 2.632 million. It would mean a 0.45% increase in the tax levy. Council hasn't seen the capital budget yet. I'm just starting to look at it now, but I can say that there's a lot of high value projects coming forward, and it's going to be challenging to deliver them in terms of that funding amount that we have. So again, I'll leave it at that, but that's the last expenditure item that we're dealing with. And then you've gone through the entire expense section of the budget.
Any questions?
Nope.
Okay. Lisa?
David, are you then asking that, I mean, that's been flagged as a strategic discussion that we would have that when we start discussing capital?
Well, you can have that now, or you can have it then, or you can have it now. I think you're in the budget now, and I can assure you again, in terms of the number of projects coming forward, the 2.632 isn't going to fund them. So you're going to be looking at deferrals. It's just a matter of sort of keeping pace. And in the past, councils have always done that. Again, it's been 50,000, anywhere from 50,000 to $150,000 add to that 2.632. This budget doesn't reflect that in terms of trying to keep the tax levy down. So it's a matter of where your political comfort is from the perspective of the current increase in the budget, whether or not you're willing to increase it another half point or not. So, I ideally from staff's perspective, or my perspective anyways, if you could sort of indicate or have that discussion now, I think it would be good to understand where we're going to sit as far as capital funding availability is concerned.
Well,
Go ahead, Robert.
what's the budget increase or the impact to our residents is what, 3%? It's about a 3% increase, right?
At this point, yeah.
Yeah, and it looks like, but I'm looking at, when I looked at it, I noticed that the business section, it's got way down. Like, I know that shows an increase, but most of the businesses, when you look at that actual pages, when I went through it, they seem to be down. How is that possible?
Yeah, a lot of business assessments are down.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can't speak to that, but I think that, you know, when the assessor looks at income generating properties, they're looking at that potential. And obviously
Okay.
COVID had an impact where you're seeing a sort of a softening. It's not a major reduction, but assessments are down in a lot of areas. We looked at other sort of impacts. One thing we did identify was a tax exemption that certain hotels have received from a tourism perspective. So, take, for example, the Crown Columbia, we've been told by the owner that they've invested millions of dollars in that facility. They did get the benefit of the city's assessment reduction for commercial investment, but they also got another credit or a reduction in their assessments as a result of the provincial legislation for tourism. So that assessed value property down there is like $400,000 right now. So you can see how that's impacting that class 6 assessment role. But again, when the assessments go down, typically you adjust up. So the rate's been adjusted to sort of compensate for that, whereby the commercial sector is still being asked to pay the same, I guess, relative percentage of the overall tax levy. So it's just an adjustment then upwards of the rate.
Okay, got it. You want a motion on to put some money in this budget? I'm prepared to make it.
Well, I can't, I'm
I
hopeful
mean, is that
that council
is that
will
what we need? Is that what we need? Do we need it?
from my professional opinion, I guess, would be, even if you could do the 2.5% or the 65,850, recognizing the 0.45% increase in the levy, it's going to go a long way. And once you see the capital budget, you'll understand where I'm coming from. But it's going to be a huge challenge here to deliver a program this year that has any substance, given some of the expenditures we're dealing with. And a lot of them, just to sort of give you several examples, we've had a roofing consultant come through. They've identified projects both on the Memorial Center as well as the Aquatic Center, which will equate to about $750,000. So you can see 750 taken out of the 2.62, you start to see an immediate sort of reduction that limits your flexibility to do projects in other areas.
On the Memorial Center, David, we just did it.
On the flat roof, the library roof.
Oh, the other part.
It's done now. It's over 25 years. There's major leakage, and there's issues associated with how the various HVAC equipment's seated on the roof. So they have to put in curbing and deal with that. But council was made aware of that when the library closed in terms of making that space available for future use. But now it's come to a point after these consultants went through, they're recommending an immediate replacement of that one section of the roof.
Mhm.
Robert, you wanted to make a motion?
Well, what about a number? Is 100,000 reasonable, Dave?
Well, 100,000 goes a long way for sure. Like I've indicated in this little.
Okay. Well, I'll make 100,000 then
Okay.
into capital.
Do we have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Any discussion on the injection of 100,000 into capital?
We have to do it, I think.
Any council members? No? Okay, all those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Carried. So the net increase then, David, will be with the addition of the 100 grand?
Yeah. You want to know what the total increase in expenses are, or the impact on the levy?
Increase in taxes.
Well, the levy will go up. It's 149,000, I think, for 1%. So you're just basically increasing by
0.7.
3/4 of 1%.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
0.7.
0.75.
Yeah, 0.75.
3/4 of 1%.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so then if council's made that amendment, just asking now for a motion to approve the general operating expenses as presented and amended.
So I'm moving it.
I have a question, please.
Go ahead, Lisa.
How is this gonna seem into though with any future discussions we have on the organizational review and needs coming out of that?
Well, again, I think it's a priority sort of based discussion and your level of comfort in the context of the overall expenditure and tax levy. And in saying that, I guess the question would be, I mean, if you believe that the organizational review takes precedent over infrastructure, then, you should have that discussion now, or when that report comes forward, given the fact that we don't have to approve the budgets till May of
Exactly.
15, you could always take money out of the capital and redirect it at that time.
Yeah,
Right.
David, I just think it's really challenging to have that discussion right now when council hasn't seen any of the documents. from
No,
Brent.
I would agree with you there. So again, recognizing the May 15th deadline, we have ample time to sort of deal with that. And if council receives the organizational review report and says, oh, we need some money, we have to make an adjustment, you're not comfortable with the level of overall property tax increase, then you're going to have to go back to the expense side and say, okay, where do we cut? So you may then want to say, okay, we're going to have to take 100,000 out of capital, and what projects are we going to cut to do that? So, but in saying that, if you sort of, you've given me now preliminary sort of direction to develop a budget of around 2.7 instead of 2.6. So you'll see what that looks like in the next month or so. And then, like I say, the organizational review will probably time quite well with that. But May 15th gives us lots of time to make any adjustments that council deems necessary.
Well, we have no idea when, depending on what the recommendation is or what the suggestions are that come back from the org review, as to when we will actually incur either less money or more money, depending on what the report says. Will it be the last quarter of 2021? Will it be the last half of 2021? Can some of it be deferred to 2022? We don't know that either.
No, you're right. And I think that the idea there behind the adjustment for the org review was not so much to deal with costs in 2021, but to set up a bit of a base funding amount. So in 2022 or 2023, you don't have to deal with a 3% increase in taxes just to fund the organizational review and impact services negatively otherwise. So that was sort of the idea. It's more forward looking and setting money aside to sort of offset or to cushion the blow in future years. But again, you can definitely have that discussion, I think, when the report comes through, and it'll be more meaningful when you do have some numbers and some understanding associated with what the consultant's recommending.
Okay, thanks, David. Okay, I think that concludes our GOC
Well,
agenda.
we don't have a
We got
second.
revenue now. Sorry.
The seconder. I moved the budget. Nobody seconded yet.
You're right, Robert. The budget was moved by Councillor Kashoni, seconded by
I
Carol,
will.
Carol. Any
Carol.
further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye,
Any opposition? Not hearing any. All those in favor?
aye.
Aye.
David,
Carried. David?
excuse me, Sandy,
Yes.
David, can you, this thing here, the summarized one all in one section, can you send that to me, please?
Which, I don't know which one you're
What you
referring
got
to.
on your screen specifically, have the
Okay,
12
yeah.
item.
You should have that in your package. I've just sort of cleaned it up for the presentation, but I can send you this file as well.
If you send it to me, yeah, if you send it to me cleaned up like that, I'll put it in. I don't have to keep all these pages.
Okay.
I'll
will
just do
do.
it electronically.
Okay,
Thank
so now we're on the revenue side, which is the upper side of the income statement, and I can get through this fairly quickly, and then you can have your break. So taxation, we've already discussed. It's 2.74% increase, 418,800, going up to 518,800, or about 3.5% now with the adjustment that was made earlier today. So I'm just going to go through these. If I see someone's hand, I'll stop. Sale of services. This deals more specifically with, you can see on the right-hand side here, the garbage, the cemetery, the recreation, municipal airport, and riverfront center. So the recreation and municipal airport, those losses have been offset by the COVID money, and council now has dealt with the cemetery. So that sort of negative amount, I'll adjust it upwards. So that'll actually reduce the tax increase somewhat, depending on how the regional district responds to the city's request for funding. So there's nothing really more to say about this section unless there's any specific questions.
Okay.
None. Other revenue from own sources, again, fairly static here. I did put in a reduction in parking, which again is offset by the COVID monies. So other than that, the revenue from own sources basically flows through as a status quo budget from on a year-over-year basis. We're not seeing any material changes in any of the fees and levies that the city charges based on sort of the summarized items here. And you also get that in your quarterly report, so you would be well aware of the various revenue that we're recognizing each quarter and how it relates to the budget.
David, just a quick question in advance of this all being presented with respect to revenue. If COVID continues the way it has been, do you anticipate the province, or do you think the city, are we looking at once again at extending the payment date to the end of August? And if that was to happen, what's the financial impact on tax revenue by extending the payment date to the end of August?
We're hopeful as a staff that we'll go back to the July 2nd deadline. I think while the August adjustment was well received, with the sort of impacts through to the community, we're not necessarily thinking to do that. But of course, the other area that council still will have to deal with after approving the revenues and expenses is to deal more specifically with the setting of the tax rates. So once we set the tax rates or provide that reporting through to you, we'll put that question to council. And I think that's a political decision that has to be made. There's no direct impact to the city in terms of revenue. It's just a timing thing in terms of when monies come into the city coffers. But we are
Cash flow issue?
Yeah, we're very solid as far as our cash goes right now. We're actually in a better position this year than we were last year. We've really managed things tightly. So again, when the property tax rate report comes forward, that will be a consideration for council, and you can provide direction as you see fit. And hopefully within the next couple months here, we'll get a better idea of where we're going to land with COVID and if the vaccines are having a material impact.
Okay, thank you.
The unconditional transfer, that comes from the province, and we're not expecting any change there. So that deals with the small community grant and the traffic fine revenue sharing. So basically saying status quo, and the $8,000 is based on what they provided us in 2020. We haven't heard word one way or the other, but we're expecting that transfer amount to be the same. Conditional transfers, those are transfers. Again, the primary one is the COVID money to deal with the revenue losses. We have a transfer from what we call the federal gas tax, and that's to offset the costs associated with the bridge debt. And then we have some money that comes in from the province for the keep of provincial prisoners. So that's a total of conditional transfers. And we have a transfer from the regional district, which includes Warfield as well as BV Parts. The only sort of strategic item noted here, and I know last year when council reviewed the budget, there was direction to set up a committee to deal with negotiating a new or an extended agreement with Warfield. This BV Parts agreement actually expires, I'm told, at the end of October. So council will want to sort of deal with that. Obviously, it doesn't have to be dealt with today, but just sort of it's been flagged that there'll have to be some consideration to that probably in the second quarter as far as advancing something to Beaver Valley and determining whether or not they want to extend the agreement. And I see Mayor Pazin's hand up.
I'm happy to reach out to Director Grieve. She tends to, I believe she is the lead on the Beaver Valley Parts Committee, to talk to her about timing and how to proceed with this.
Okay, that sounds good to me. All right, with no other questions, we're moving into the final item here, which is a transfer from reserves and funds. I did talk about this early on in the presentation. There's a reduction of 301,900, which affects the tax rate as far as the makeup of that revenue loss through the property tax levy. So in 2020, council increased that to get to a 0% increase. Now that money is being removed. So we're going back to the base of 340,000. The 340,000, I've worked that into the 5-year plan whereby it's gradually reduced. And ideally that number will eventually be 0. It's been stuck on 340 for a lot of years. Yeah. And we're hoping that one day we'll be able to sort of reduce that amount that's included in the budget. But at this point in time, the major sort of issue is to get back to the base level. So that's why we're suggesting, or I'm suggesting, that the budget be reflected going back to the 340. So 301,900 coming out and being passed on through the tax levy. So that's it in a nutshell. And the total change in operating revenue, 0.27%, which is the same as the expense. Again, recognizing that the budget has to balance to zero each year. So that concludes the revenue. And if council will indulge staff and put forward a motion to approve revenue, then we can sort of recalculate our numbers and move forward again with the tax rates, which would be the next segment along with the capital budget.
I'll make that motion to move revenue.
Moved by
Second.
Lisa, seconded by Colleen. Any further discussion on the revenue section? Okay, not hearing any. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion is carried. And I think that concludes that. Thanks, David. Very short version, but effective. We'll see you all at 6 o'clock. I need a motion to adjourn the GOC.
So moved.
Robert, thank you. And bon appetit.